Hello and welcome back to the Space Madness podcast. This is your host, Jeff Nosanov. And I have with me today a retired system engineer from JPL, now at an interesting new space company called TransAstra. His name is Craig Peterson. So welcome, Craig. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Jeff. I've been listening to your podcasts over the
Oh,
last couple
thank
of
you.
weeks, and I've really enjoyed them.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me, actually. A big reason I'm doing this is to share the personal side of all this stuff that I think is easy to overlook with all the spacecraft and all the other crazy stuff that we actually do.
Yeah.
So thank you
Well,
so much for that. So Craig was at JPL for about 20 years. He and I overlapped, my first year, his last. And today I got my JPL shirt on just like last week, but the cat's not here yet, so you can actually see it. But I'm sure her
waiting
ears
to
are perking
pounce.
up. Yeah, she knows my podcast voice. System engineering is a really interesting discipline that I was first introduced to by my grandfather, who I think was active long enough ago that it wasn't really recognized as a distinct field yet. So I hope we can talk about that.
Oh, sure.
But I think before that, I want to get to your story. I mean, you were at JPL for a long time. Now you're at TransAstra. I think
Yeah.
everybody knows JPL. Fewer people know TransAstra. So how would you introduce that company?
Oh, well, Tesla has existed as a company for about 8 or 9 years now. I got involved about 7 years ago, knowing the CEO and founder from both JPL and post JPL life. He's a really interesting guy in his own right. Maybe I'll get a chance to interview him one of these days.
I would
Dr.
love
J-
to, yeah. And
Dr. J-
I actually briefly worked with Joel on a strategy exercise for JPL.
right, you're on
I think
the executive advisory committee or something like that.
I did talk my way into that. Yeah, I think I
Uh,
was the youngest person there by about 20 years, but it was a great exercise. I learned a lot. I hope I helped.
Definitely, the old guys are remarkably vital in terms of their intelligence and their understanding of a lot of really important stuff,
Hmm.
which I will get into as I
Sure.
reel back through. But yeah, basically, I wasn't by any means ready to retire when I left JPL. So Joel said, "How would you like to join TransAstra as employee number 3?" I said,
Fantastic.
"Sure."
So what does TransAstra do?
We are involved in developing the technologies necessary to do asteroid mining, which involves 4 different aspects as we break it down. You have to,
Hmm.
first of all, you have to find the asteroids or
Hmm.
detect them. You have to be able to capture them. We have a telescope system that's incredibly innovative and allows us to find dim, small objects that currently nobody else can.
Okay.
That's our detect. Then our capture, we have invented this capture bag, which, in addition to be capable of capturing asteroids, can also be used to clean up space debris and things like that. So we're
Okay.
now turning that into sort of a dual purpose technology.
Hmm.
Just like where we're turning our telescopes into a dual purpose technology for space domain awareness.
Sure.
And then after that, you've got the move. You have to be able to bring the asteroid to some place where you can deal effectively with it and then
Hmm.
ultimately to process it. That's the part that's probably least mature
Hmm.
in our program, where we have designs for what we call the solar forge. It would allow you to
Yes.
basically use the entire buffalo, as it were.
Love it.
But initially, the idea is just to be able to extract volatiles from these asteroids, basically getting water from a rock,
Hmm.
because the majority of asteroids have a fair amount of water bound into it, and that can be extracted simply by application of extreme heat. And we've got a patented technology called optical mining that you can
Okay.
use to extract volatiles from an asteroid. Starting with that, that can lead to production of propellant in space, so that you no longer have to send everything from Earth. If you want to
Hmm.
refuel, you can refuel in space. So the whole idea
Yeah.
is that we become less and less reliant on Earth for what is necessary to do more advanced exploration and development of space, including ultimately manufacturing and things like that. They're just starting to be ideas in a lot of people's heads. I think
Yeah.
there's one company that's been uh, sending packages up into orbit and creating crystals and things like that that are of high
Hmm.
value, and then bringing them back down to Earth to use them. But the idea is that ultimately you just keep them there. You use them for space applications.
Sure.
So that's kind of the long-term vision. We have hopes that we will be able to go and get our first asteroid in the not too distant future. I can't go into a lot of detail
Okay.
about that at this.
Sure.
Stay tuned. That'll be new
Sure.
announcements in the next year or two. about this. But it's been
Yeah,
exciting.
I think TransAstra might be the most focused space effort on Earth at this point. Not knowing the details of the Chinese space program,
Yeah.
I think you guys are certainly more focused than NASA is.
Yeah, but we've been able to leverage
Which of course
funding.
is not fair because
Yeah.
yeah.
But we've been able to leverage
But I
funding.
think it's a really incredible story that's not
Yeah.
well known outside of small circles of just how effective you guys have been.
Yeah.
So I want to talk more about that later. But so you're retired from JPL and you're basically building the foundation for space industry in space, not on the ground. So anyone who listened to this is going to know my next question. You know, let's go way back. What led you to the space field?
Okay.
In the first place.
Yes. Well, if I had to pick one moment in time that I kind of first got an idea of this was a possible career and a possible way to go for me was, well, you know how you have these easy readers, these books that are intended for kids that are just starting to learn how to read. And my father had gotten one for me called "You Will Go to the Moon."
Cool.
And it was the kind of the classic outline that I think Werner von Braun had come up with back in the 50s. And I was like 3 years old or something like that, but I was immediately captivated by this whole idea of, traveling in space. And for a long time, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to be an astronaut or a nuclear physicist or, what I wanted to do. When my eyes started going, I realized, oh, shoot, I probably won't be able to be a pilot. I can't be an astronaut. And then I got too tall to be either a pilot or an astronaut in those days. So, I had to be like, 5'8", preferably, or under, those early days of the right stuff, things like that. I grew up during the space race.
Sure.
So, and of course, that also fed into my interest in space, watching the Mercury and then the Gemini and then finally the Apollo missions to the moon. We had a summer cabin on the lake. I grew up in Minnesota.
Okay.
My dad was a college professor. We'll get back to that in just a bit. But we had a summer cabin up in a lake in Minnesota, but we were not allowed to have a TV there. Summer, read, listen to music, whatever. No TV.
Play outside. Yeah.
The summer of the moon landing, we brought the TV up there and were allowed to watch, all the coverage of the moon landing. That was
Sounds
how
reasonable.
Yeah, important. Even my parents considered it to be. I grew up in a college town in southern Minnesota, a little place called St. Peter. The college is Gustavus Adolphus College. It's probably reversed here, but it was a rather unusual liberal arts college that it had very strong relations with the Swedish government. And they decided they wanted to name their first really big new science building after Alfred Nobel.
Okay.
They got the approval from the Nobel Foundation and everything to do that.
Wow.
In addition, they started the series of annual conferences called the Nobel Conferences.
Okay.
That were held on campus every year in October. And the first year, for the dedication ceremony, they had like 50 Nobel.
Wow.
Largest gatherings ever. Usually every year they would pick a topic and invite Nobel laureates and other key figures in the field.
Okay.
And so I was allowed to skip school to go and sit and listen to these things and stuff like that. And I even got into some of the social events with these people, which was absolutely fascinating to me, to be able to actually ask questions of people like Fred Hoyle and Murray Gell-Mann. I guess I must not have embarrassed myself too badly because they were willing to talk to me.
Yeah.
Which is something that I've always found gratifying about some of the great minds that I have come across in my time, is that they are always willing to talk to somebody who shows a genuine interest in what they're doing. It doesn't hurt if you can ask an intelligent question.
Yeah. Can I interject with one of my favorite things about JPL is that I would wander around whenever I didn't have work to do or it was done, and I would do that exactly. And I would just ask people, and I would literally go down the halls of every building I could get into, and I figured out which doors were locked all the time. But I would look through someone's window and say, "Oh, there's a piece of gear on the wall. What does that do?" And eventually I came to recognize the general classes of technologies that you could have on a desk. And so I remember that very fondly, and almost to a person, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, let me tell you what that does." Or, in a real way, I was spoiled for workplaces forever, because how can you beat that?
Yeah,
that
yeah,
kind of stuff in those people. But
yeah. I mean, if
yeah,
I kind of consider myself to be sort of a knowledge junkie. I just
uh,
like finding out and learning new things. Uh, one of the best ways, of course, is ask an expert.
hmm.
But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm going to second about
Sure.
it.
Yes, we were talking about your early exposure to academia, I
Yeah,
guess. No problem.
okay. But having things like this in my backyard, basically, as I was
Hmm.
growing up, helped feed into my interest in a number of things. Space was always a big part of that. The
Hmm.
original Star Trek series came out,
Hmm.
it's the right time to continue to feed my appetite for these kinds of things.
Sure.
And strangely enough, when my parents were back at school,
Hmm.
my mother was in the nursing school in Minneapolis, and my father was at the University of Minnesota. And
Hmm.
they made friends with this other couple who were uh, the fellow was at the University of Minnesota, and his wife, or soon to be his wife, was also
Hmm.
in nursing school, and they became great friends.
Okay.
Fast forward to after my freshman year, no, I guess after my sophomore year of college, I was looking around for something more interesting than working at one of the local companies
Hmm.
for uh, for a job, and my parents, had talked to these folks, and they're going, "Oh well, we have interns at JPL in the summertime. Why don't you, have them send in an application, and if he can, if he's willing to come out here and spend, 3 months in
Uh,
California, we'll put him through the ringer." And so I did.
so what year was that? Was that
That was
1973?
1975.
Okay, I looked at your resume. Okay, I want to ask some questions about JPL in 1975, but I saw that you have a math degree, so I'm curious
Yeah,
how you landed on math instead of engineering or something else.
well,
Because
yeah.
math to me, despite all my exposure to it now, is still almost like a level of witchcraft beyond a certain point. The ability of some human beings to think purely in mathematical terms continues to amaze me. But back to you.
Well, yeah, it turns out that I'm just one of those people for whom mathematics is like falling off a log.
Okay.
I just have a innate natural aptitude
Okay.
for dealing with it and for being able to pick up concepts. I had
Hmm.
a brief hiccup in college when I first got introduced to abstract algebras,
Okay.
but finally realized that, I was overcomplicating things.
Okay.
And once I had my viewpoint of it adjusted and
Uh-huh.
said, this is easy. This is just like everything else in math for
Wonderful.
me. It was just, I got skipped a grade when I was back in school
Okay.
because of, my advanced abilities. And I wasn't the first. My older sister also got skipped a grade. So
Interesting.
at least she kind of paved the way for me. So the teachers kind of knew a little bit what to expect. Mostly just let me entertain myself. Everything
Sure.
went well.
Well, so during those,
Uh,
okay, so then that means you were in high school when during Apollo 11.
yeah, yeah, that's right. I just started out.
Wow. I was just thinking. So I'm curious at that time, did the average high school student care, or was this like,
Not
or I
really.
guess Vietnam? I guess they might have cared more about Vietnam. Huh?
Yeah, I had some friends. Oh, yeah, that was, yeah, a huge topic of debate among some of my friends. Needless to say,
Hmm.
there wasn't entirely a consensus. I didn't necessarily have a consensus in my mind about the whole thing either.
Uh-huh.
I just knew it didn't sound like a lot of fun, and I did not want to get drafted. I was the
Yeah.
last year that they held the lottery for the draft.
Uh,
So I had to register, and I got my lottery number. Fortunately, it was a really high one, so it was like, okay. And then they ended the draft. It was like,
I see.
okay, don't have to
Yeah.
worry about that hanging over my head anymore. But for me, that
Uh,
was more just a distraction
I
than
see.
anything else. I've never been. I mean, I understand the importance of politics. I
Yeah.
understand, that the political realities in the world in which we live in. It's by no means a perfect world. I've, have enormous sympathy for the peoples of these various countries that we are not necessarily in political alignment with their governments.
Yeah.
But in all my travels, I've found that everywhere there are just all kinds of decent people.
Mm.
And it's like, man, if we could just get
Yeah.
past what our governments are always trying to do and get in the way, the world
Yeah.
would be a much, much happier place. But,
Is what it
I'm an
is.
idealist. What can I say? I will
Well,
gladly.
I like that observation because I think you have to be idealist to some point to work in the space world because
Yes.
the
I think
challenges are
that's,
just so enormous. I want to share one thought with you from a book I recently read about Vietnam, and I try not to talk about I mean, I brought it up, but I don't talk about a lot of
Yeah.
non-space politics here. But this one is really interesting because this ridiculously thick book, this thick about Vietnam, talked about that Kennedy's schedule. He would have a whole morning about Vietnam, and then he'd have lunch, and then talk about Apollo. And just
Well,
the contrast of those two things, it just boggles the mind that could be on the same day of anyone.
yeah,
Anyway, I just thought that was that
yeah, that
continues
was
to amaze me.
yeah, very very much of that time having to deal with that
Yeah,
greatly different
yeah,
ideas and
yeah.
notions of the
But
future, shall we say.
but back to space. I should restrain myself a little bit. But so I'm curious. So you're in ninth grade and Apollo, and you see the
Yeah,
landing on the moon.
yeah.
I alluded to this earlier, but I mean, did the average high schooler notice? This is before I was
It
born.
was, yeah, it was mostly the people that I ended up spending my time with. I mean, they quickly separated us out in the public high school
Hmm.
between the vocational and what we call the pre-college
Oh,
track
interesting.
of my
Okay.
school. I mean, my high school was a little interesting because it was a college town. Naturally, the college
Uh,
faculty very interested in making sure that their kids were getting a good
oh.
education, and so the selection of teachers and things like that was
Hmm.
fairly closely scrutinized, and
Sure.
the whole structure of the education
Mm,
was, like I say, divided into after ninth grade. It was divided into these two tracks: the pre-college
I see.
and I, of course, was on the pre-college track. Needless to say,
Yeah.
and the people in that area tended to be more involved and more interested in
Okay.
things. The larger mass of students.
So your introduction to JPL then was as an intern. I'm trying to remember. I think Lou Friedman also was an
Yeah.
intern, but earlier. Did you ever
Yes.
overlap with him?
No, no.
Okay.
He was off in the Planetary Society by the time I
Okay. By then, yeah. He
yelled.
might
But
have been an intern in 1965, not
yeah, I was going to
1975.
say probably
Okay.
like a decade
Yeah.
before. But I turned in the summer of '75, and then the summer of
Uh,
'70s, and then I graduated in '77, and they hired me. So I
amazing.
was like, okay, bye. I'm off to California. See you later. I'm tired of. So I had no qualms, should we say, about taking
Yeah.
it and
I mean,
moving.
and that's such an interesting time to be starting there because you have Voyager and Viking. I mean, it must have felt like Star Trek literally came true.
Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. And, JPL built the Viking orbiters, and while they were on their way to Mars, along with the landers that they were carrying, they noticed that there was a leak in the propellant system on one of the orbiters, and they were
Okay.
concerned as to what this might mean. Should they close out? They had dual plumbing, so they could close off that line and go to the backup line. But of course, if that had problems, then they were already stuck. So they needed
Right.
somebody to take the data and do a projection based upon all the telemetry. And guess who was the fastest data analyst in the West at that time?
Okay.
So I got
Wow.
all these spools of paper tape that came out of the
Uh-huh.
telecommunications that had all the telemetry on this, and I ran the
Yeah.
calculus and then plotted on graph paper by hand the projection
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
the fuel loss, which was then taken to the highest levels of the
Okay.
laboratory for the decision making. And
Yeah.
they decided that based on my analysis,
Wow.
it wasn't severe enough to warrant switching over to the backup lines, which was kind of bummed out some of the propellant engineers because it's like, oh, well, we put these in here just for that, reason that I first came to JPL. The way JPL is divided is you have directorates, and then within them you have divisions. And
Mm,
when I got to JPL, they had an entire propulsion division, and they had a liquid propulsion
mhm,
section and a solid propulsion section. And within the liquid propulsion section, they had an advanced concepts group, which is where I landed for some
mm,
strange reason. But it was also the time when handheld calculators were just coming out into the market. There were a few of
okay.
these desktop critters that were kind of clunky, and
Yeah.
we had one that had different functions that came on these little cartridges that you would plug in to allow you to
Okay.
do things like little trigonometry and stuff like that,
Okay.
in addition to just the normal adding and subtracting.
Uh,
But the engineers were starting to get their little handheld Texas Instruments and HP calculators. I had taken some computer courses when I was in school because I
Uh-huh.
thought, no, these computers, they may be useful someday. So
Uh-huh.
I quickly learned how to program all of these. So, the
Okay.
engineers would say, can you, program it to, do this, that, and the other thing? But hey, sure, no problem.
Mm.
And then I ended up actually writing some Fortran for a more elaborate program that ran on one of their old IBM systems to look
Mm.
at the thrust loss analysis, where they had plumes from the Voyagers, the
Mm-hmm.
reaction control system plumes were impinging on the structure a little bit, and so they were losing a little bit of control authority. And Galileo was built in a similar fashion. So
Uh-huh.
I had the blueprints for the Galileo spacecraft, and I was taking the measurements to feed into this program to see how
Wow.
much impingement you would get there. I got to do all kinds of fun stuff for these various missions, just being there at the right time.
Yeah. And
But I remember sitting at the campus at Caltech the
uh-huh.
morning when the Voyager Viking landers landed, and the first pictures came back from the surface.
Yeah.
I got up at 6 in the morning, which, if you know me, that's nearly impossible task. I'm not a morning person.
Huh.
It is, and they had the feed going live to the monitors in the Caltech students,
Mm.
and it was like, yes, the first hit
Wow.
from another planet, the
Yeah.
surface planet. It was just, it's inspiring, at least for somebody like me. So,
I agree. And I had an interesting experience, which is that so I was born in 82, and so by the time I was old enough to notice, we had basically seen all the planets up close except for
yeah,
Pluto. And then, 2015 was it?
yeah,
Or whenever the New Horizons Pluto
yeah,
flyby happened, and we all got our first view of the surface of Pluto. And I thought, wow, that's the whole neighborhood.
yeah, pretty much.
Basically to that level of fidelity, at least the outer planets.
Yeah,
And I thought, what an incredible time to be alive. That achievement happened, certainly obviously started before my lifetime, but that I was there to see that first family photo, so to speak.
yep, yep.
And I'll share with you, if you ever go back to the Star Trek Next Generation episodes, at least in the first season, if you watch the opening credits,
Uh-huh.
okay, you will see they go past all the planets, but guess
Yes.
which planets are just blurry blobs? The planets they hadn't visited yet. And I only noticed that when my son was a baby and I'd watch Star Trek with him and he fell asleep. But
Yeah,
but I remember thinking, wow, they really made that section of the intro
yeah,
with what they had,
yeah, yeah.
and it was just left to the imagination of the viewer. And I just love that so much because that's how it's always been for
Oh
me.
yeah. No, I mean that was one of the things that continued to kind of throw me,
Mm,
In the original Arthur C. Clarke story that
mm,
2001 was based on, the monolith was at Saturn, but they
mm.
decided, well, that means that we'd have to show going by Jupiter first. And it's gonna be enough trouble doing Jupiter and Saturn. Then maybe we should just put it in Jupiter
Oh,
orbit.
okay.
Dead. And of course that
Interesting.
ended up making some interesting ties in with Europe and the possibility of oceans underneath the ice
Yeah,
stuff. So in some respects that was uh, an improvement, shall we say, over the original idea, and it was
sure.
almost accidental to the overall concept. But yeah, I mean, that was another thing. And it was my 13th birthday. My dad took me and a couple of my friends to one of the larger theaters to see
Hmm.
2001.
Oh, wow.
They fell asleep. I did not.
Yeah, I need to show my kids that. They might be old enough to be confused by it.
I was just, it was so brilliantly accomplished
Yeah.
that, and it's
Well,
so,
and certainly, I mean, and the AI discussion is so timely.
yeah,
I think I'd be very interested in your perspective on AI tools and modern space system engineering, but let's get to that.
yeah. Well,
So you're early in your JPL career,
yep.
and
And I decided, I was starting to get kind of a side thing in
uh,
computer programming
okay,
that was going on. But there are people at JPL who are going, well, you really ought to go get an advanced degree.
mm,
And they encouraged me to go off to graduate school.
mm,
And I wasn't really sure because I wasn't really sure what kind of graduate school I wanted to go to and what
mm,
exactly I wanted to learn, other than I'm always happy learning new things.
sure,
I tried taking some graduate courses in applied mathematics at UC San Diego,
uh,
except it was the first year they were offering an applied mathematics degree.
mm,
So they really didn't have their courses lined up
Ah,
as I had thought they might, and I ended
okay.
up doing more peer mathematics, which again I was really good at, but it's like not really what I wanted. So pull out of there, and then through a friend, got a programming job at
Mm.
Hughes Aircraft Ground Systems in Fullerton.
Oh, you
And
left JPL.
yeah, yeah, I left to go to graduate school, but
Okay.
wasn't really happy with what I was, learning at graduate school. This is
Uh-huh.
not where I wanted to go. And a friend of mine said, hey, I just started working here, doing
Uh-huh.
computer programming. I know you've got some chops in computer programming.
Okay.
Come here. And I'm, sure, why not? And
Mm.
they had some interesting things to work on. The very first what we call network databases were just
Mm.
being created, which ultimately led to the whole relational database system and all that sort of
Mm.
thing. But they were just called network databases back then.
Okay.
But I became really good at designing them and building
Mm.
applications on them and things like that. And so good that it was like, this is no longer interesting. What
Hmm.
else is out there? And
Mm-hmm.
so I went and got a job at Fluor Corporation, which is a
Mm-hmm.
huge engineering outfit in Irvine.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Okay.
were converting all of their engineering analysis programs from control data to IBM. They needed a whole
Okay.
bunch of people to do this. And it was like, oh, you're going to pay me more money? Sure.
Yeah.
Let's give this a shot, because once again, lots of new things to learn.
Sure.
I was good enough at it, but after 3 months, they gave me a big raise. It's like, oh, well, hey,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
guess I'm doing all right.
So we have Irvine in common also, because I went to UC Irvine and I worked for the city for 2 years.
Yeah.
So small world.
So, and then after that, I went to Northrop Electronics Division to work in a software verification and validation role,
Okay.
because the fact that I was a, really good programmer meant that I also understood the importance of testing software
Yes.
properly. And they had just started a serious development program. North Electronics had been a research and development lab, but they
Mm.
got a contract to actually start building components for the MX
Okay.
missile, the inertial guidance unit. And so there was a lot of software involved,
Mm.
creating all the parts and testing all the parts and all these sorts of things. And the Air Force had fairly strict standards about how they wanted all of this stuff done. And unfortunately, people who were originally put in charge of all this really didn't understand what they were doing.
Oh.
And the guy who hired me for the software V&V thing ended up leaving. And
Uh-huh.
that meant that we were leaderless. While I'm not crazy about managing, when there has been a situation where either I jump in there and fix things or it's all going to go to hell,
Uh-huh.
I threw my hat in the ring and got the job.
Sure.
But because I have a very analytical mind, within 6 months, and I'm also pretty verbal, as you can tell, for an engineer, I'm capable of expressing myself reasonably well. I'm also understanding what other people are trying to tell me, and I listen very carefully to what the Air Force
Mm-hmm.
folks were saying about what needed to be done. Basically, threw out everything that we originally had, whereas basically we had a different procedure and everything for every single thing that we did. They said, no, we're gonna have two forms and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and just we're gonna apply those in these different situations as needed to fulfill the roles
Mm-hmm.
grading the software that we were in charge of doing the quality assurance on. And I was
And
also bold enough that if the engineering people weren't being responsive, I would escalate it until they did.
sure. Well, and then software becoming such an enormous part of spacecraft
Yeah,
mission engineering, I'm sure this is going to connect
yeah.
back to
Oh yeah,
to
oh yeah, exactly. I mean, for a while there, I was a software systems engineer, and I was
okay.
actually belonged to the National Council of Systems Engineers. 3 or 4 years
Mm.
later, they changed it to the International Council of Systems Engineering, but I was there way back at the beginning because I felt this was really important if we were going to do the kind of job we needed to in
Mm.
developing software. Had to be properly systems engineered, just like anything else.
Yes.
It really comes down to understanding how things fit into the broader scheme of things.
Yeah, I think I'm just barely old enough to remember when software was not considered an engineering discipline
Yeah,
in the way
yeah.
that it is now. Yeah.
Just like, well, systems engineering originally, the term was considered somewhat pejorative in some
Yeah. Yeah.
circles. It was not. It was kind of like, oh, this guy can't do anything, so he's a systems engineer. Yeah, all
Yeah.
right. But
So how'd you find your
eventually
way
that
back to
changed
JPL?
over
Yeah.
time. Right. From Northrop, after I got everything on an even keel, and I was just spending most of my time sitting in my office reading the newspaper and then doing my twice a day Dave Packard's management by walking around just to take the temperature of staff and
Yeah.
everything. Because my view towards management is a little different than a lot of people's, and that I feel that the manager's job is to remove any impediments that get in the way of your people getting work done. So, if they have a problem, if somebody was getting in their way, or if there was stuff coming down from above that I didn't want to have impact them,
Mm.
it was my job to take that stuff down and get it
Yes.
out of their way so that they could do the work.
And as someone who's had that kind of manager and all the other kinds, I appreciate it.
Yeah, right. It just seems so obvious to me. You don't
Yeah.
have to read a lot of books to
Yeah.
understand that there is a good way to manage people and some not so good
Mhm.
ways. And as a result, my first performance review as a manager, the one critique I got was that some of my peer managers thought that my people were having too much fun.
No.
Yes, I was just,
Yeah.
like, oh, well, okay, I will accept that criticism.
Yeah.
And I'm not
The
going to
the
do anything about it, but I will accept it.
yeah, the beatings will continue until morale improves.
In any case, and it was at Northrop that I first started proselytizing for personal computers. That these things that the
Okay.
managers had sitting on their desks as elaborate paperweights could do real work for the people in the trenches. And I
Interesting.
convinced management to buy one, but they said, okay, but you got to have a log to make sure this thing
Okay.
is actually being used. And by the end of the first week, we had a line of like
Yeah.
a dozen people constantly wanting to use the system.
Sure.
So after a few months of that, they let me buy much more for my group, and some of the other
Yeah.
groups decided we could do this too. So
But
yeah, and I continued that at my next job because,
mhm,
like I say, I was getting bored at Northrop, and it's like, yeah, it's not like they're going to promote me
mhm.
at my age with all these all the guys around. I went off to work for Hughes again.
Hmm.
I'm on a classified project that I can't really talk much about. But once again, I probably started bringing in personal computers for people to use,
Sure.
using my systems engineering approach to decide how we wanted to build the thing that we had to build, the computers and all this stuff. Had one of the world's first parallel processors. Really cool stuff.
What decade was that?
Oh, let's see now. That must actually I can tell you. I had just brought up my resume just in case I need to refresh my memory. And that was 84. Back
84. And
back
it's
in
still classified.
85. Oh yeah. No, this is one of
Okay.
these compartmented things.
Okay.
So I had a very high level clearance. But the interesting thing was JPL had just taken on a job for
Hmm.
a joint task force of the Army and the Air Force to try and build the world's first military intelligence system. We
Hmm.
used to say we were automating an oxymoron because military intelligence contradicts the
Yeah.
term. But they've been throwing all kinds of money at this from
Hmm.
all kinds of different people, and JPL was kind of on a downturn in terms of NASA work
Yes.
at this point.
Yes.
They brought in Dr. Lou Allen, who'd been the head of the National Security Agency, 4-star Air Force general and everything, so they could take on this
Okay.
job. And I went, oh, this could be an interesting way to get back into JPL.
Yeah.
And since I had the tickets,
Hmm.
they hired me immediately, and I became one of the internal software systems engineers on
Hmm.
this project. Ended up doing the central database design,
Hmm.
what they call the correlation algorithm, was for the all source analysis system, and
Okay.
that was actually a lot of fun. And
Okay.
I quickly found out that uh, just because I don't understand what somebody in the military is trying to tell me doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing. And the
Hmm.
way I found this out was they finally took us out to one of these uh, exercises that they had.
Hmm.
This is a command post exercise, and where you would see how all the intelligence was being passed around between the various ages.
Hmm.
Places. It's like all of a sudden, this lieutenant colonel who I've been working with and had a really hard time trying to figure out what he was asking for, he became the most lucid person I ever knew because he could point to everything he'd been talking about. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I get it
Yeah.
now. I was
I
able to have
see.
the context that was missing. So that worked out really well. And then I was a contractor at this point, but after working on the Army side, they kind of had a split with the Air Force, and the Air Force wanted another team to build their version. The Army wanted a mobile version. The Air Force wanted one that would run their big, fancy new
I
IBM
see.
computers at
I see.
their command centers. So I had to spend 7 months in Texas because they had the computers there in an environment that was highly secure that we
Sure.
could use. But then I got to spend most of the year in Germany, which is where
Cool.
we ultimately fielded it to the Combat Operations
Interesting.
Intelligence Center in Ramstein, which I loved. I'd taken German in school, so I just felt great. I'd go off on the weekend by myself if need be and just go travel all over the place.
So was that towards the end of the Soviet Union and the Cold War?
Yes, it was just before the collapse of the
Wow.
Soviet Union. You could see it coming when I was there in Europe. It's like, oh wow, it's pretty clear.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is going down. So yeah, that was a fascinating time to be over there. And then when I came back, my management at JPL would say, well, we've got this really important final subsystem that we need to have incorporated, and we would love to put you in charge of it, but you'd have to become a JPL employee. And it's like, okay, well, let's just sit down and do some negotiations.
Yeah.
I became a JBL employee again, so I could take over this critical subsystem. To give you an idea how critical it was, the customer basically had told JPL that if the next delivery didn't include this, they didn't want the next delivery. So no pressure.
Okay. And it was not, and NASA was not the customer.
No, this is not. This is the
Got
Army.
it. Okay.
And so,
Wow.
needless to say, we got through that with our usual plume. Although at one point I had one of my programmers leave, so I had to get in there and start programming again myself, which I was hoping not to have to do. But my team called me Dr. Frankenstein because I would steal everybody else's code to put together to make it what I needed to do. So, but fortunately, they were all really good coders. So their stuff, it was almost like it was already built object oriented. So I was able to pull these things together for a slightly different purpose than what they had originally written it for.
Sure.
Anyway,
so it sounds like a large amount of your JPL experience, at least the second time, was defense oriented.
Yep. However, that didn't last for too long because once we finished up with that, I then got put into this team to figure out how to bring JPL into the modern internet age. Because I'd been one of those people who, the minute Mosaic came out and all that, it's like, oh, okay, this is, and we need email. Everybody needs to have email. We need to have all these standard systems for everybody in engineering at JPL. And I got put on the team to figure out how to do that. And we figured it out, got it ready to roll out. They offered me a job running some of the systems. It's like, yeah, that sounds boring. I'm at JPL. I should be doing space.
Yeah.
So I talked myself into a job on Cassini.
Okay.
And had the thrill ride of my life because the guy that I ended up working for is called Charlie Colhes. He was referred to by Carl Sagan as the Mario Andretti of the solar system because he'd been the mission designer that had figured out the flybys for the Voyager spacecraft to get the maximum science and, be able to see the maximum amount of the moons and everything on their trajectories. And Charlie was just one of the delightful people I have ever worked with. He was just so sharp, and he was great at taking unstructured problems and figuring out how do we break this into something that is manageable and that we can actually analyze and come up with answers.
Okay.
And I was like his right-hand guy. The project manager would have a nightmare. He'd call Charlie. Charlie and I would get up to the whiteboard and we'd start writing stuff out. And, after about an hour or so, it's like, oh, okay. Well, if you do these calculations, we should be able to tell them that they can go to sleep again.
Is that how they ended up with the approach of breaking complex mission trajectories into pieces and, let's say, analyzing the transfer to Saturn at this fidelity and then within the Saturn system? Okay.
That's right. They had to because there was no other way to do it. And then, of course, after the success of the flyby techniques that were proven out in the Voyager, Cassini couldn't have been done without a lot of these flybys, and in particular, Titan as kind of an anchor to allow them to adjust their orbits which any way they wanted, using a minimum of fuel, allowed Cassini to be one of the really huge success stories.
When you were when you were a kid or a student and diving into math, did you ever imagine in a million years you'd be applying that math to those trajectory problems? I
Nope.
mean, no,
Well, I mean, because I didn't know that existed, that kind of
sure.
problem that existed. But that
Yeah.
was the great thing about JPL is it allowed me to get involved in all kinds of problems in
Mm,
all kinds of areas and basically be the creative thing that, basically found the way through, thread the eye of the needle or whatever it was
yeah.
to come up with an answer that was needed and that could do what needed to be done. At the same time, I also thought to myself, well, if I'm really going to be doing space stuff, I should make sure I really know what I'm doing. And that's when I
Mm.
went into Joel's office at JPL and said, "Oh, you're teaching a graduate course in spacecraft systems engineering at Caltech. Can I get in?" He said, "Okay." And I took his course. And at the end of the year, he said, "Where have you been all my life?" And probably started dragging me into everything he was doing at JPL.
Oh, great.
And after he left, then I ended up working for the Mars Exploration Technology Program and selecting technologies that were in dire need of being developed in order to do the Mars Exploration
Okay.
Program, which we were very successful at, which is why we got all these rovers operating
Yeah.
on Mars, although the program was killed long ago, but the technology, thank God, was on. And we did a similar thing for the solar system exploration
Mm,
technology program, developed a whole bunch of roadmaps, technology roadmaps.
mm,
And that was one of the things that allowed me to get in and talk to all these technologists and pick
yeah.
their brains and
Yeah.
learn about, the more of the details of power systems, propulsion system,
Yeah.
guidance, navigation, control, electronics, avionics, you name it. I
Mm,
got to talk to some of the acknowledged experts in all of these fields and putting together these roadmaps. And my job was to go, okay, if we get this technology performance, then that now enables these missions, which currently we cannot do because they're not affordable because we don't have this technology, yada yada. Anyway, that was my first introduction to. He continued to teach the course for a while, but he got involved with a huge Air Force project at one point,
mm,
and he needed some help in teaching the course. So for 2 years, I ended up co-teaching the course at Caltech
mm,
in spacecraft systems engineering, which one of the thrills of my life was when we had the students evaluate my performance after the first semester as to, whether the homework was, too easy, just right, or too hard. And almost all of the
mm.
students said my homework was too hard. And I just felt so gratified that it's like, oh, I'm really making these Caltech people sweat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, they're getting their money's worth out of me. But yeah. And then after that, became time, was going through another downturn. It's like,
Uh,
okay, I think it's time for me to take early retirement.
okay.
And
So that was 2011, right?
yep, that was 2011.
So, so I had it. Okay. So you didn't stay around until the Curiosity landing.
No, no, I had to watch that at home.
Okay.
Like most people.
Well,
Kept on working with Joel on and off. I worked for a couple of other people for a company that was looking into laser-powered launch vehicles. That was fun. And then also for the a company that was developing a microwave propulsion system, the superheating water with microwaves and using that for propellants. After that, well, that's about the time at that point that Joel said, "Hey, you wanna come work uh, for TransAstra?" And I said, "Yeah, the idea is great." I had worked with him on this stepping stone report. That was so much fun because I got to work with Jim French. I don't know if you're too
mhm,
familiar with Jim French, but he wrote the book on space vehicles with Mike Griffin called
mhm,
Space Vehicle Analysis. Griffin and French. Jim had gone. He'd worked on all the Apollo missions and things like that. He had been there. He was
wow,
he was in his late 70s, I think, at this point. Sadly, he
uh,
passed away a year or two ago. But he's my ideal of somebody who he's not going to stop until it gets carried away. Kind of how I see my career at this point. As long as I can contribute, I'm going to keep on working. Hopefully, you get to see more of the fruits of my endeavors over the coming years. I mean, just in the time that I've been at TransAstra, we've gone from a company of paper studies to
mhm,
real hardware.
yeah.
We have we got stuff in our lab. It was just a few years ago it was just ideas.
Well,
So it's
I'm curious about the comparison of ideas to hardware at JPL versus ideas to hardware privately. I can make some high level guesses, but what would you say? What insights do you have about all of that?
Well, I think one of the advantages that we had was that we really did our homework and we didn't overpromise. So we tried to keep everything as realistic as possible every step of the
Mm,
way, even when it was on paper. We were not going to put ourselves out on a limb and then saw it off behind us. And as a result, it turns out that almost all of the technology that we were developing, the hardware we were developing, is actually outperforming what we had projected in the early
mm.
days, which is really, really nice to see that. Okay, we did not go down a blind alley here
So
by
you're
too optimistic, but by
so
being
you're
realistic in our analysis.
so you're beating your design performance, and you're
Yeah,
ahead of schedule, and you're below budget. I mean, you've
yeah.
really done the trifecta, huh?
Yeah, yeah. No, it can be done. You just got to
Wow.
get it off on the right foot to start with,
Yeah. Well, I
and
think
not have anything stop you. Unfortunately, all our is it's small enough and well enough contained that we don't get affected by politics yet. We may yet get to the stage where
I
we
see.
have to deal with some of these things that right now are not impediments to us, but I could see happen.
Yeah.
With some of the
Sure.
large projects, because funding would go, okay, you're funded. Oh, wait, no, you're not. Here's
Yeah.
some of the
Yeah.
funding, and it's like, how do you
Yeah.
stay?
Well, as much as I would like to challenge you with to find a solution for that in the last 5 minutes of our call, I will limit the question to the system engineering lessons
Yeah,
taken from all of this experience, both
yeah,
from the big stuff at JPL, even the military stuff that I assume is behind all those doors I could never open,
yeah. That's all.
but also, taking that private, so to speak. What's your takeaways for the
Well,
future, for the younger people who would like to not repeat the mistakes?
yeah. Well, there is no substitute for doing the proper initial spade work. You have to
Mm,
make sure you understand the problem well enough that you can do the upfront analysis and
mm,
do the requirements definition that will withstand reality. Because Murphy's out
yeah,
there, and
yeah,
if you don't do your homework, if you don't spend enough time making sure that you've got your I's dotted and your T's
mm,
crossed, it's going to bite you. You
yeah,
can not guarantee it. But if you're somebody like me who just loves to, dig in and learn stuff and everything, it's
mm,
just the greatest possible career. But yeah, you got to be willing to, do the research. It's a lot easier these days, but just to bring it back to AI,
yeah,
AI has a lot of promise of making it easier to find out all of this stuff, but it's not ready for prime time yet. I've tried getting it to do some
yeah,
technical stuff for me, and it can't. It doesn't have the kind of integrative mentality that humans are
mm,
capable of. It does a great job of editing. It cleans up my, chicken scratch notes and things like that
mm,
beautifully. It makes me
yeah,
so much better when I try to produce a written product. But to have it do some of the thinking that needs to be done for these things,
yeah.
it's going to be a while, I think, before we can really rely on it in those kinds of things, if ever. I mean, there may be some areas that it's just not going to have the pattern matching capability that these gray cells seem to be capable of doing.
Yeah, I really like that insight, and I'm gonna close, I think, on a philosophical question that I keep coming back to, which is, for some problems, for some people, the distinction is invisible, and I don't know when that's me.
This is
And
why it's have people to work with who are also really
yes,
smart.
yes, that's true.
That
Yeah,
will keep you out of trouble. That's one of the reasons working with Joel has really
yeah,
helped. I think in return, uh-oh, my presence has been edited. I'm afraid I'm going to have to call this to a close. But
sure,
thanks so
perfect
much, Jeff.
timing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
thanks so much. We'll be in touch soon. For everyone, this was the Space Madness podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.